I remember the night it all began to fall apart. We were hosting a dinner party, something Emily loved to do. Our loft, all polished floors and exposed brick, was filled with the hum of conversation and clinking glasses. She moved between the guests with her usual effortless charm, offering drinks, sharing stories, her laugh cutting through the background noise like a bell. From across the room, I watched her, feeling that familiar sense of pride. She was stunning, long auburn hair falling in waves, a smile that made people feel like they were the only ones in the room. Emily always knew what to say, how to make someone feel important, and she'd chosen me. Or so I thought. Mid-conversation, I caught a flicker of something on her face. Just for a moment, her smile faltered as she glanced down at her phone. She turned away, heading towards the kitchen. Her steps hurried. My curiosity got the better of me, and I followed her, slipping into the hallway just in time to hear her speaking in hushed tones. "I told you I'll handle it," she whispered sharply. There was an edge in her voice I hadn't heard before. When I stepped into the kitchen, she jumped, quickly tucking her phone into her back pocket. She gave me a bright, practiced smile. "Everything okay, babe?" I tried to brush it off. But that night, as the guests left and Emily cleaned up, I couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted. I asked her about the phone call, keeping my tone light, but she shrugged it off. "Work stuff," she said, giving me that smile again, the one that could charm its way through anything. But the unease stuck with me. I told myself it was just paranoia. After all, I had no reason not to trust her. 3 years together, living in the same place, sharing the same bed. She knew my family, my friends, even my deepest fears. She had never given me a reason to doubt her. But that night, as I watched her brush her hair in the dim light of our bedroom, something in her expression seemed distant, as if she was a million miles away. The next morning, I tried to put it behind me. I buried myself in work, meetings, and emails filling up my day. But then I saw it, a message notification that popped up on her laptop while she was in the shower. She'd left her computer open on the kitchen counter, something she usually never did. The sender's name was unfamiliar. The message read, "Tomorrow, same time. Don't forget." My stomach twisted. I knew I shouldn't have, but I clicked it, hoping for some mundane explanation. But the message was encrypted, just a string of symbols and numbers that meant nothing to me. When Emily came out of the shower, I had already closed the laptop and was pretending to read the morning paper. But my mind was racing, trying to make sense of it. Days passed, and my thoughts kept circling back to that message, to her whispered phone call. I started noticing other things, little details that I might have ignored before. The way she'd been working late more often, how she'd step outside to take calls instead of staying in the same room with me, the way she'd quickly swipe her phone screen shut when I walked by. One evening, as we sat on the couch, she leaned in to kiss me, but her touch felt off, like she was somewhere else entirely. I tried to ask her about it, but she deflected, talking about how stressed she was with work, how she wished we could take a vacation together. I wanted to believe her. I really did. But that night, when she fell asleep beside me, I stayed awake, staring at the ceiling, wondering if I'd imagined the whole thing. Then came the night that pushed me over the edge. I was driving home late from work, stuck in traffic on Main Street when I spotted her. She was across the street, outside a coffee shop, a place she had no reason to be at that hour. She was standing close to a man in a dark coat, their conversation animated. She didn't see me, but I saw her. I pulled over, watching them through the rain-streaked windshield. They spoke for a few minutes, the man handing her a small, unmarked envelope. She looked around nervously before slipping it into her purse. When she walked away, she glanced back over her shoulder, as if making sure she wasn't being followed. When she got home that night, she acted as if nothing had happened, telling me about how her day at work had dragged on with endless meetings. I asked her where she'd been, keeping my tone casual, and she didn't miss a beat. "Just running some errands after work," she said with that easy smile. But now I knew she was lying. I tried to confront her gently, to hint that I'd seen her, but she deflected, turning the conversation around on me, asking why I was suddenly so suspicious. She made me feel like I was the one in the wrong, like I was imagining things. It made me question my own sanity for a moment, but I couldn't shake the image of her and that man, the envelope, the look over her shoulder. That was when I knew I had to find out what was really going on, even if it meant digging into places I wasn't supposed to look. I started paying attention, following her movements when I could, listening closely to her conversations. My world, once solid and predictable, had begun to feel like quicksand, and I was sinking deeper with every day that passed. And the worst part? A part of me still wanted to trust her. I wanted to believe that I was wrong, that Emily was still the woman I thought I knew. But deep down, I knew that whatever I was about to uncover would change everything between us forever. A few days after I saw Emily with the stranger, I found myself standing outside the coffee shop, staring at the spot where they'd met. The whole area seemed unremarkable, just another street corner in a busy city. But I couldn't shake the feeling that it was the epicenter of something much bigger. It was ridiculous, maybe. Who was I to think I could uncover anything by just standing there, watching people come and go? I didn't know where else to start. But then I thought of Jack. And I went way back. We'd met in college, rooming together during freshman year when life was simpler, before jobs and mortgages and serious relationships. He'd become a tech guy, one of those people who could make a computer do things that were supposed to be impossible. We hadn't talked much lately, but he owed me a favor, and I was desperate. When I called, he sounded surprised to hear from me, but agreed to meet for a drink. We ended up in a dimly lit bar downtown, the kind of place where no one asked questions. I told him about the message I'd seen on Emily's laptop, careful not to reveal too much about my suspicions. I said I thought maybe she'd gotten herself mixed up in something shady, maybe with a client from work. Jack frowned over his whiskey. You really think she's hiding something, man? Emily always seemed solid. Yeah, well, people aren't always what they seem, I replied, and even as I said it, I felt a pang of regret. I wished I didn't have to drag him into this, but I needed someone on my side. Can you check it out? The message was encrypted. Looked like some kind of code. Jack nodded slowly, pulling out a small notepad. Send me whatever you got. I'll see what I can dig up. The next few days felt like an eternity. Every time Emily left for work, I found myself looking through her things, searching for more clues, emails, receipts, anything that could explain the late nights and that meeting with the stranger. I even found myself driving past her office once, just to make sure she was really there. But each time, I came up empty. Then Jack called. David, you might want to hear this, he said, his voice lower than usual. We met at the same bar, and he slid a piece of paper across the table. It was a printout of the decrypted message. Tomorrow, same time, the package is ready. I stared at the words, trying to make sense of them. What the hell does that mean? Beats me, Jack said, leaning back. But there's more. I did a little digging on the sender's number. It's a burner phone, untraceable. But I managed to cross-reference it with some other sources, and it's been used in a few other transactions around the city, all involving a guy named Marcus. Marcus who? That's the thing, no last name. But he's got a reputation. Let's just say he's not the kind of guy you want to owe favors to. Whatever Emily's caught up in, it's not good. The name Marcus echoed in my head, as if it carried some dark weight. I tried to keep my expression neutral, but inside I felt like my world was spinning out of control. Who the hell was Marcus? And what did he want with Emily? Look, man, maybe it's nothing, Jack said, trying to sound reassuring. But you should be careful. If this guy's involved, it's not just some harmless secret. It's a problem. I thanked him, though I barely heard his words. My mind was racing, trying to piece together this new information. What kind of package was Emily dealing with? And why would she need to meet with someone like Marcus? When I got home that night, Emily was sitting at the kitchen table, flipping through a magazine. She looked up and smiled as I walked in, but I could see the tension around her eyes. It was like we were both playing roles, pretending that everything was normal when we both knew it wasn't. How was your day? She asked, but her tone was too casual. Fine, I said, trying to sound just as casual. I took a deep breath, deciding to test the waters. Ran into an old friend today. Jack. Remember him? Her eyes flickered just for a second. Yeah, of course. How's he doing? Good. He's doing some consulting work now. Funny, we started talking about those encryption things. You know, like the message I saw on your laptop last week. I watched her closely, waiting for her reaction. She stiffened just slightly but quickly recovered. Oh, that? It's nothing. Just a security protocol for work. They make us use these weird codes sometimes. She shrugged and forced a laugh, but it didn't reach her eyes. You know how these companies are. I nodded slowly, pretending to accept her explanation, but inside I was seething. I knew she was lying. Her story didn't match what I'd found out from Jack, but she was good at covering her tracks, better than I'd thought. And it made me wonder just how long she'd been doing this, keeping secrets from me. I decided to push a little further. You seem distracted lately. Is everything okay? I feel like we've been distant. Emily's expression softened, and for a moment, I almost believed she was genuine. I'm sorry, David. Work's been stressful. Maybe we could take a trip, get away for a weekend? Just the two of us, like old times. It was a good play, I had to admit, turning the conversation back to us, making it seem like she was trying to fix things. But I wasn't about to let it go. Maybe, but if there's something going on, you can tell me, you know. Her smile faded, and her gaze turned cool, distant. I told you it's just work. Why are you being so paranoid? The accusation stung, but I held my ground. Maybe because I feel like I don't know what's going on with you anymore. She sighed, exasperated. David, you need to trust me. We've been through so much together. Don't ruin it over some stupid misunderstanding. I dropped it then, pretending to let her words sink in. But inside, the doubts were multiplying. Her reassurances only made me more determined to find out the truth. And as she turned away, I couldn't help but feel like I was watching a stranger in my own home. That night, as Emily slept beside me, I lay awake, replaying every moment in my mind. Jack's warning echoed in my head, be careful. But I couldn't stop now. I had to know who Marcus was, what kind of package Emily was involved with, and just how deep this went. I got out of bed, careful not to wake her, and opened my laptop. If I was going to get any answers, I'd have to dig deeper myself. The first step was finding out where Emily had been meeting Marcus and what else she might be hiding from me. And for the first time in our relationship, I found myself wondering if I was ready to face what I might find. I couldn't sleep. My thoughts kept circling back to Marcus, to the cryptic message, to the way Emily's smile had barely masked the edge of irritation when I questioned her. I needed answers, and I needed them now. So I did something I never thought I'd do. I followed her. It wasn't hard. Emily had a routine, but now that I was paying attention, I noticed the subtle changes. A few extra minutes spent in the driveway before she drove off, a lingering pause before she answered my questions about her day. I kept a burner phone in my pocket, tracking her movements through a cheap app Jack had set up. I told myself it was temporary, just until I figured out what she was hiding. One rainy evening, I watched her car pull away from the driveway. But instead of heading toward her office, she took a different route, one that led across town to a neighborhood I barely recognized. I followed at a distance, my hands gripping the steering wheel tighter with every turn. She parked outside a nondescript office building, a place with no signs or logos, just dark-tinted windows that hid whatever went on inside. I kept my distance, watching through the misted windshield as she got out of the car. A few minutes later, Marcus emerged from a side door, wearing that same dark coat I'd seen him in before. He handed her a manila envelope. They spoke in hushed tones, too far for me to hear, but I could see the tension in their gestures. Marcus glanced around, and I ducked lower in my seat, my pulse quickening. When they finished, Emily got back into her car and drove off, taking a different route home. But I stayed behind, watching Marcus as he lingered near the door, his expression thoughtful. I waited until he went back inside before I made my move. I parked down the block, heart hammering in my chest, and approached the building's side entrance. The lock was surprisingly simple, probably not meant to keep out anyone determined enough. I slipped inside, moving quietly through the dark, sterile hallways. It was mostly empty, the kind of place that operated after hours, meant to be unnoticed. I found Marcus's office easily enough. His name wasn't on the door, but I recognized his coat draped over the back of a chair. The room was cluttered with papers and files, most of them scattered across the desk. My gaze zeroed in on a thick folder labeled with my name. My hand shook as I opened it, revealing page after page of bank statements, property deeds, and emails. They were all connected to me, my accounts, my investments, even the down payment on the loft Emily and I shared. And then I saw it. A transfer order, dated 2 weeks from now, authorizing a large sum of money to an offshore account under Marcus's control. But the signature wasn't mine. It was Emily's. For a moment, the world seemed to tilt on its axis. My knees nearly buckled as I tried to process what I was looking at. This wasn't just some casual affair. This was a plan, meticulous and calculated. Emily was trying to bleed me dry, and she was using my own accounts to do it. The door creaked behind me, and I spun around, shoving the papers back into the folder. No one came in, but I knew I couldn't stay much longer. I snapped a few photos of the most incriminating documents with my phone, then slipped out the way I came, heart pounding in my ears. The drive home was a blur. When I got back, Emily was sitting on the couch, scrolling through her phone, the picture of calm. It took everything in me to keep my expression neutral as I walked in, to act like I wasn't about to explode. "Hey," she said, looking up with that same easy smile. "How was work?" I swallowed hard, forcing a smile of my own. "Same old. You know how it is." She seemed to accept that, but I could feel her eyes on me as I moved around the kitchen, pretending to make myself a snack. I kept glancing at her, trying to see through the facade. Did she know I'd followed her? Was she just playing her part, waiting for me to make a mistake? I couldn't hold back anymore. "Who's Marcus?" I asked, keeping my tone casual, as if the name had just popped into my head. Her expression didn't change. "What do you mean?" "I saw you with him," I said, turning to face her fully. "Outside that building on Broad Street. You were pretty cozy for someone I've never heard of before." For a moment, something flashed in her eyes, something like fear, but she buried it quickly. "David, you've got this all wrong. He's just a client, some guy from work who needed help with a project. Why are you following me? Because you're lying to me?" I snapped, the anger spilling over. "I saw what you were doing, and I know about the money, Emily. I know about the account." She froze, her expression finally cracking. But then she shook her head, her mouth twisting into a bitter smile. "You really think you know what's going on, don't you? You have no idea." "Then tell me," I demanded, stepping closer, trying to read the truth in her eyes. "What's this all about? Are you planning to take everything from me?" She met my gaze, and for a moment, the mask slipped. I saw something cold and calculating in her eyes that I'd never seen before. "You've always been so naive, David, so willing to believe the best in people. Maybe that's why this is so easy for me." Her words hit me like a punch to the gut. I stumbled back, my mind reeling, trying to understand how the woman I'd loved for 3 years could have been playing me this whole time. But she didn't give me a chance to respond. "Think whatever you want," she said, her voice turning sharp. "But you need to stop digging into things you don't understand. You'll only get hurt." She turned and walked away, leaving me standing alone in the kitchen, clutching the edge of the counter for support. Her warning echoed in my head, and for the first time, I realized just how dangerous this game had become. But I couldn't stop now. I wouldn't. Whatever she was hiding, whatever she and Marcus were planning, I would get to the bottom of it. Even if it destroyed everything I thought I knew about her, and about myself. That night, I went back to Jack, showing him the photos I'd taken. His face went pale as he looked through the documents, but he didn't ask questions. He just nodded, agreeing to help me dig deeper into Marcus's background. But as I watched him scan the pages, I couldn't shake the feeling that he was hiding something too. That maybe, just maybe, I was walking into a trap of my own. Jack came through with more information on Marcus a few days later, though his voice was tense when he called me. We met at his apartment, a small, cluttered space with walls covered in posters from concerts we'd attended back in college, relics of simpler times. But now, the air between us was heavy with secrets and mistrust. Jack pulled out a stack of documents, spreading them across the coffee table. "Marcus isn't just some small-time player, David. He's got a history, offshore accounts, shady deals, even ties to some organized crime families. He's been running schemes like this for years, using different names, but I found a few that match up." My stomach twisted as I scanned through the papers, photos of Marcus with different aliases, dates, and transactions. And what about Emily? Is she just another Mark? Or is she in this up to her neck? Jack hesitated, rubbing the back of his neck. "Honestly, it's hard to say. But, look, David, I'm not sure you should keep pushing this. These are dangerous people. You should think about cutting your losses and walking away." I looked at him sharply. What do you mean, walk away? I can't just let this go. She's trying to ruin me, Jack. She's been lying to my face for God knows how long. And now there's this guy involved. I get it, I do. He interrupted a little too quickly. But you have to think about your safety. Maybe she made a mistake. Maybe she got involved in something she can't get out of. The way he said it, like he was trying to convince himself as much as me, sent a chill down my spine. For a second, I wondered if I could trust Jack anymore. He'd been helpful so far, but he seemed too invested in convincing me to back off, too nervous whenever I pressed for more details about Marcus. I pushed those thoughts aside, telling myself I was being paranoid. No, I'm not walking away, I said firmly. Whatever she's planning, whatever Marcus is after, I need to know the truth. Jack sighed, leaning back into the worn couch. Fine, but promise me you'll be careful. These aren't the kind of people who just let things go when they're cornered. I didn't promise anything, but I left with the new information burning a hole in my pocket. Back at my place, I laid out everything I'd gathered, photos, documents, notes I'd taken from overheard conversations. It was all starting to fit together, but the picture it formed made my blood run cold. The next morning, I pretended to head to work as usual, but instead, I doubled back, following Emily as she left the house. She drove to the warehouse district on the east side of town, a place where few people went unless they had business that didn't belong in the daylight. I parked a block away and tailed her on foot, keeping a safe distance. She entered one of the warehouses, disappearing through a side door. I waited for a few minutes, then crept closer, trying to find a window to peer through. Inside, I spotted her and Marcus talking in low, urgent voices. Emily looked more animated than I'd ever seen her, gesturing sharply with her hands. I pressed my ear to the wall, straining to hear. Their words came through in disjointed fragments, but it was enough to piece together the gist. Almost ready. Just need his signature. Are you sure he hasn't figured it out yet? Marcus asked, his tone hard. Emily's laugh rang out, bitter and sharp. David? He's too blinded by his own guilt to see what's right in front of him. Besides, if he does find out, we've got a backup plan. You know what to do. The word sent a jolt through me. Backup plan? I had no idea what that meant, but I wasn't going to wait around to find out. I slipped back to my car, pulling out my phone. I considered calling the police, but what would I tell them? That my girlfriend was plotting something against me with a guy I barely knew, with no concrete evidence they'd accept? They'd laugh me out of the station. Instead, I called Jack, telling him what I'd overheard. He sounded more alarmed than I expected, urging me to meet him immediately to discuss a plan. But as I drove toward his apartment, doubt gnawed at me. Emily's words kept replaying in my mind, blinded by his own guilt. When I arrived, Jack's door was slightly ajar. I stepped inside, calling his name, but got no answer. In the corner of the room, his computer screen was still on, displaying files about Marcus. But something caught my eye. A series of emails exchanged between Jack and someone else, dated weeks before I'd even contacted him for help. I clicked through them, my breath catching as I recognized the sender's email address, Marcus. The emails were brief but clear enough. Jack was feeding Marcus information, keeping tabs on me from the start. The most recent one chilled me to the bone. He's getting too close. Keep him distracted. The sound of footsteps behind me made me spin around. Jack stood in the doorway, his face pale as he saw what was on the screen. David, I can explain, he began, raising his hands as if to calm me down. I took a step back, rage and betrayal churning in my gut. Explain? You've been working with him this whole time? You lied to me? It's not what you think, he said quickly, but his eyes darted toward the door like he was calculating whether he could make a run for it. I had no choice, okay? He's got leverage on me, money I owe, things that could ruin me. But I wasn't trying to hurt you, man. I was trying to protect you. I clenched my fists, trying to hold back the urge to punch him. Protect me? By selling me out? By keeping me in the dark while Emily and Marcus plot God knows what. He took a step closer, lowering his voice. David, listen to me. You still don't know the whole story. If you go after them without knowing everything, you'll just get yourself killed. I didn't care anymore. The only thing I could think about was how badly I'd been played by Emily, by Marcus, and now by the one person I thought I could trust. I don't need your help anymore, Jack. Stay the hell away from me. I stormed out before he could say another word, slamming the door behind me. As I drove back home, I tried to ignore the tightness in my chest, the sense of betrayal that seemed to close in from every side. But it was no use. I had no allies left, no one to trust but myself. If they thought I was going to back down, they were wrong. I spent the rest of the night planning my next move, knowing that the final confrontation was coming. Whatever backup plan they had, whatever trap they thought they'd set, I'd be ready. I spent the next 2 days preparing, letting the weight of betrayal settle deep in my bones. The anger kept me awake, kept me sharp. They thought they had me cornered, but I'd been playing along, gathering every scrap of evidence. And now it was time to strike back. I sent a text to Emily from an anonymous number, telling her to meet me at the abandoned warehouse where I'd seen her with Marcus. She wouldn't know it was me at first, but I made sure the message was enticing enough. I have what you want. Come alone. She would come, and she'd bring Marcus with her. They wouldn't pass up an opportunity to secure whatever package they thought I had. I couldn't risk involving the police. Too many loose ends, too many things they'd never believe. I'd have to do this alone. On the night of the meeting, I got there early, setting up a small camera to record everything that was about to unfold. I needed proof, something concrete to use against them if things went south. The old warehouse creaked in the wind, shadows shifting across the concrete floor. It was cold, the kind of chill that settled into your bones. I heard their car before I saw it, the headlights sweeping across the grimy windows. Marcus stepped out first, scanning the area, his hand tucked into the pocket of his coat. Emily followed, her face tense, her eyes searching the shadows. When she spotted me standing near a rusted metal pillar, she froze. "You're the one who sent the message?" she asked, her voice low, but edged with surprise. I stepped forward, keeping my hands visible. "Yeah, it's me. I thought it was time we had a little chat. Don't you think?" Marcus's face darkened as he moved closer, positioning himself between us like a bodyguard. "You've made a big mistake, David. You should have kept your nose out of this." I laughed, the sound bitter and raw in the empty space. "Funny, I was just about to say the same thing. But before you try anything, you should know that this whole place is wired. One wrong move, and everything you say gets sent straight to the cops." That was a lie, but they didn't know that. Emily's eyes darted around the room, looking for any sign of a hidden camera, and I saw the flicker of uncertainty in Marcus's gaze. It bought me a few seconds, enough time to keep talking. "I know about the money, the offshore accounts. I know about the forged signatures. Hell, I even know about Jack's little side job, feeding you information while he pretended to help me. And I'm guessing that envelope you gave her wasn't just for show, was it?" Emily's mask slipped for a moment, her expression turning cold and calculating. "You don't know what you're talking about, David. You're in way over your head." "Am I?" I pulled out my phone, playing the recording I'd made of her conversation with Marcus from the other night. The sound quality was rough, but the words were clear enough. "Just need his signature. He's too blind to see." Emily's face paled as the recording played, her eyes darting to Marcus. He moved toward me, his expression murderous, but I held up a hand, trying to keep my voice steady. "Back off, or I'll make sure this gets to every news outlet in the city." Marcus hesitated, but his eyes burned with barely restrained fury. "You think you can threaten me? You're a dead man, David. You just don't know it yet. And you think I'm afraid to go down fighting?" I shot back, feeling a wild surge of adrenaline. I've got nothing left to lose. For a moment, it seemed like we were locked in a standoff. Then the sound of footsteps echoed through the warehouse, and I turned to see Jack stepping out of the shadows, his face drawn and pale. He was holding a gun, and his hands were trembling. "Jack, what the hell are you doing here?" I demanded, my mind spinning. He didn't look at me. His gaze was fixed on Marcus, his voice shaking. "This wasn't part of the deal. You said no one would get hurt." Marcus's expression twisted into a sneer. "You think you have a choice now? You think he'll let you walk away?" Jack's hand wavered, and in that moment, I saw the truth written all over his face. The fear, the regret, the realization that he'd gotten himself in too deep. But I didn't have time to process it before Emily lunged forward, her hands clawing at my jacket, trying to reach my phone. I grabbed her wrist, twisting her arm behind her back, but she fought like a wild animal, kicking and scratching. Marcus moved toward me, but Jack stepped between us, his gun shaking in his grip. "Don't move," he shouted, his voice cracking. "Enough of this." Marcus snarled, and before I could react, he drew a knife from his coat, slashing at Jack's arm. Jack cried out, dropping the gun, and it clattered to the floor between us. In the chaos, Emily broke free, and I barely managed to catch the gun before Marcus lunged at me. The next few moments blurred together, a desperate struggle, fists and kicks, the gun slipping between our hands. Marcus was stronger, his weight bearing down on me, but I fought like a man with nothing left to lose, knowing that if he got the upper hand, I was dead. A shot rang out, deafening in the enclosed space. For a heartbeat, everything froze. Then Marcus staggered back, clutching his side, blood seeping between his fingers. His expression twisted into a grimace of pain, and he dropped to one knee. Emily screamed, rushing to his side, her hands covered in his blood. "You idiot! You ruined everything." I stood there, panting, the gun heavy in my hand. Jack was leaning against the support beam, clutching his bleeding arm, his face pale with shock. I knew I should call for help, try to end this before it got worse. But the sight of Emily kneeling beside Marcus, the two of them so intertwined in their deception, froze me in place. "Why, Emily?" I asked, my voice hoarse. "Why do this? Why betray me?" She looked up at me, her eyes blazing with a fury I'd never seen before. "Because you never saw me, David. You never saw who I really was. You thought I'd be happy playing house, living your safe little life. But I was always meant for more, and you were just too weak to see it." Her words cut deeper than any knife, but before I could respond, Marcus groaned, clutching at his wound. "This isn't over, David," he hissed through gritted teeth. "You think you've won, but we'll drag you down with us." I knew he was right. Even bleeding out on the floor, Marcus had the power to ruin me. And Emily, she still had that fire in her eyes, that unbroken defiance. I could turn them in, try to use the recordings as leverage, but a part of me knew that this fight was far from over. As sirens wailed in the distance, I lowered the gun, stepping back, my mind racing with what came next. This wasn't the end I'd imagined. It was just the beginning of another kind of nightmare. The sirens drew closer, a shrill wail echoing through the empty streets outside the warehouse. My hands shook as I wiped blood from my face, the gun slipping from my grip. Marcus lay on the ground, clutching his wound, while Emily hovered over him, trying to stem the bleeding with her hands. Jack slumped against a pillar, his eyes closed and his breath coming in ragged gasps, still pressing a wad of fabric to his bleeding arm. I could barely think through the noise in my head, the chaos that had consumed everything I thought I knew about my life. This wasn't how it was supposed to end. But here we were, three people I once thought I understood, and now I didn't know if any of us would make it through the night. When the police arrived, everything became a blur of flashing lights and shouted orders. They pulled me aside, cuffing my hands and asking questions I barely registered. I pointed them to my phone and the hidden camera I'd set up, trying to explain the recordings, the threats, the plot against me. They hauled Marcus to the ambulance, and Emily was dragged away in handcuffs, still spitting curses at me, her eyes wild with rage. As they loaded her into the back of a squad car, she turned her head, fixing me with a final, venomous glare. "This isn't over, David. I'll make sure you pay for this. You think you're safe now, but you have no idea what's coming." Her words sent a chill down my spine, but I forced myself to stay silent, my mind already reeling with the possible fallout. Even if Marcus and Emily went down, their connections, their secrets, they wouldn't just disappear. Whatever trap they'd laid for me might still be out there, waiting to snap shut. The rest of the night was a blur of questions, interviews, and paperwork. The police seemed skeptical of my story, but with the recordings and the photos, I managed to keep their suspicion at bay. Jack was taken to the hospital under guard, and I was eventually released with a warning not to leave town. But I knew that the real questions were just beginning, and that Marcus and Emily's schemes would haunt me for a long time. I went back to the loft, our shared space now feeling like a crime scene. It was strange to see everything so unchanged. The photographs on the wall, the half-drunk bottle of wine we'd shared the week before all of this started. I stood in the doorway of the bedroom, staring at the bed where Emily had slept beside me for years, where she'd whispered sweet lies and made me believe we had a future together. I couldn't stay there. I packed a bag, leaving behind the life I'd thought I wanted, and checked into a dingy motel on the edge of town. It was the kind of place where people kept to themselves, where no one would ask why my hands still shook or why my face looked like I'd been through hell. I tried to sleep, but every time I closed my eyes, I saw her face, heard her threats. Her words echoed through my mind. You think you're safe, but you have no idea what's coming. What did she mean? Was it just a desperate attempt to scare me? Or was there something else I'd missed? Some final twist I hadn't uncovered? The answer came the next morning, in the form of an envelope slipped under the motel room door. I tore it open, expecting some legal notice or a message from the police, but what I found made my blood run cold. Inside was a letter, handwritten in a neat, elegant script I recognized all too well, Emily's. The note was brief, taunting, as if she'd written it knowing it would be her last word to me. You think you've won, but you're still playing my game. Did you really believe I didn't plan for this? The accounts you thought you exposed, there's more where that came from. And don't worry, the secrets you buried aren't as deep as you think. You always underestimated me, David, but I never underestimated you. The letter ended with a cryptic line. There's always another move. Enjoy your victory while it lasts. I crushed the paper in my fist, rage and fear twisting in my chest. The threat was clear. She'd left traps in place, backup plans that would ensure I couldn't just walk away. And if she'd hinted at knowing things about me, about secrets I thought were safe, I didn't know what she could have meant, but I couldn't afford to ignore it. I spent the next few days looking over my shoulder, checking every account, every record I could think of. My paranoia grew by the hour. Every time my phone buzzed, I expected to hear from a lawyer or a reporter digging into my past. But no calls came, no new evidence surfaced. It was like waiting for a bomb to go off without knowing when or where it would explode. But the real blow came 2 weeks later, when I found a news article buried on the third page of a local crime report. It detailed Marcus's condition. He was in a coma, unlikely to wake up anytime soon. But there was a brief mention of a visitor he'd had before slipping into unconsciousness. A woman, not identified by name, who had managed to slip past the police at the hospital. The description matched Emily. I stared at the screen, the words blurring before my eyes. Emily had been there right before Marcus went under, and now she was nowhere to be found. The police hadn't even realized she'd slipped through their grasp. The next day, I packed my things again, leaving the city behind. I drove aimlessly through back roads and small towns until I found a place where no one knew my name. A cabin on a forgotten stretch of road, a new phone number, a new identity. Anything to keep me out of sight, out of reach. I knew that no matter where I went, I'd always be looking over my shoulder, wondering when she'd come back for me. She'd taken everything I thought I knew about trust, about love, and turned it into a weapon. And even though I'd exposed her, even though I'd survived that night, I couldn't shake the feeling that the game wasn't over. Not by a long shot. Sometimes, late at night, I hear a car's engine outside, and I wonder if it's her come to finish what she started. I tell myself I'm imagining things, that I'm free now. But then I remember her final words, that taunting smile, and I know that freedom is just another illusion. I keep a gun by the bedside, and I sleep with one eye open, waiting for the day she comes back to claim whatever prize she thinks she's owed. And in the darkness, I can almost hear her voice, whispering through the walls. There's always another move.